Welcome to day 10 out of 24 stories this Christmas. Today's story is called Mr. Men and Little Miss, The Christmas Contest, written by the same artists. The weeks before Christmas were a very busy time of the year for Mr. Tall. His phone did not stop ringing. And who was calling Mr. Tall? All his friends who needed help during hanging Christmas decorations on their houses. Early each morning, Mr. Tall set off across the countryside to the next house on his list. Mr. Bump was particularly grateful to see Mr. Tall because Mr. Bump and ladders were not a good mix. There were no need for ladders when you had Mr. Tall there to help you put up your decorations. Mr. Tall went from house to house arranging coloured lights and decorations. All kinds of Christmas decorations. There were snowflakes and stars and snowmen. And lights and lanterns and Santa's sleigh and bananas. It could only be for Mr. Nonsense. Well, at least the bananas matched the nonsense and snow. The only person Mr. Tall couldn't help was Mr. Messy. His Christmas lights were in such a terrible, tangled up, naughty mess that there was nothing Mr. Tall could do with them. Mr. Tall's biggest job was at Miss Splendid's house. She liked to have the very best display in the neighbourhood. Well, what she really liked was to show off. She had such a glittering display of lights that you could see them from space. Father Christmas had never had a problem finding her house on Christmas Eve. This year, said Miss Splendid, we ought to organise a competition for the best Christmas house. I wonder why you suggested that, smiled Mr. Tall. It would be fun, cried Miss Splendid. You should be the judge, said Mr. Tall. But then I couldn't enter, said Miss Splendid. I know, laughed Mr. Tall, with a wink. Okay, we'll both be judges, but next year I get to enter, said Miss Splendid. And so the two of them organised a festive competition. There were lots of entries, and Miss Splendid and Mr. Tall were at the lighting up of each house. Mr. Perfect had high hopes, but when he turned on his lights, nothing happened. He couldn't understand what had gone wrong. But what had gone wrong was Miss Naughty. She had stolen all his light bulbs. Miss Chatbox's display only covered half of her house, which Miss Splendid and Mr. Tall thought was rather odd. But not odd at all if you knew that the phone had rung halfway through Miss Chatbox's hanging up her lights. And when had the phone rung? 3 days ago. But her display was much better than Mr. Mean's. Miss Splendid and Mr. Tall wondered why he had bothered. Miss Scatterbrain had gone to a lot of trouble. She had a wonderful display, but it wasn't quite right. Well, in fact, it was quite wrong. Miss Splendid and Mr. Tall visited a lot of houses, and some of the Christmas decorations were good, but they couldn't find that extra special festive display that they were looking for. Something that would amaze them and surprise them. Finally, they reached Mr. Messy's house. They had very low expectations. A tangled nest of wires hung limply on his roof. Mr. Messy turned on his lights. And suddenly, that great big jumbled up mess made sense, for it spelled out Happy Christmas, which was a huge surprise to Miss Splendid and Mr. Tall. And it was a huge surprise to Mr. Messy. Well, I never, she exclaimed. It was such an amazing surprise that Miss Splendid and Mr. Tall declared him the winner on the spot. And next year you get to be the judge, said Miss Splendid to Mr. Messy, and then she grinned at Mr. Tall. Now, I wonder who will win next year's competition. See you for day 11.